Juan woke before the sun, as he always did, to the familiar sounds of Manila breathing itself awake. The thin walls of their home let in everything, the distant cough of engines warming, the shuffle of feet on concrete, a neighbor's radio murmuring news in a half-asleep voice. He lay still for a moment on the woven mat he shared with his younger sister, watching a line of dawn slip through a crack in the roof. Morning was his favorite time. It belonged to hope. He rose quietly, careful not to wake his sister, and stepped outside. The air smelled of damp earth and yesterday's rain. Somewhere nearby, a rooster announced the day like it was the most important job in the world. Juan washed his face with water from a plastic basin, the chill snapping him fully awake. As he dried his hands on his shirt, he hummed softly, an old melody his father used to sing. It had no clear beginning or end, just a gentle rise and fall, like the tide. Inside, his mother was already moving. She worked with a calm efficiency born from years of doing more with less. Rice steamed in a battered pot, and banana leaves waited to be folded into neat little packages. Juan joined her without a word, tying twine, handing over tools, learning again the quiet language they shared. Selling rice cakes was not a dream, but it paid for notebooks, for uniforms, for tomorrow. And while his hands worked, his mind wandered to music, the way notes could stretch a moment, the way a song could make hunger feel smaller. By the time the sun rose higher, Juan balanced the tray against his hip and walked the narrow street, calling out in a voice still rough from sleep. Neighbors smiled, some buying, some just greeting him like family. They all knew the boy who sang. Sometimes they asked him to sing while they waited, and he did, not because they asked, but because it felt natural, like breathing. His voice slid between the concrete walls and lifted into the open sky, soft and steady. School came next. Juan loved learning, especially words and stories, but music followed him there too. During breaks, he tapped rhythms on desks, wrote lyrics in the margins of his books. Teachers noticed, some encouraging, others worried he might be dreaming too far beyond the classroom. Juan listened politely, nodded, and kept dreaming anyway. After classes ended, he returned home to care for his father. Illness had stolen his strength slowly, like a thief who didn't want to be caught. Juan fed him, read to him, sang to him when the pain crept in. His father's eyes always softened at the sound of music, as if remembering a younger man with bigger lungs and louder laughter. "Sing like you mean it," he once whispered. "Sing like the world is listening." Nights in Manila carried their own music. The city never fully slept, it only lowered its voice. Juan sat on the steps outside their home with his guitar, the one his uncle had rescued from a pawnshop years ago. The wood was scratched, the strings replaced too many times, but it held his dreams like a secret. He practiced until his fingers ached, chasing the perfect note, the perfect feeling. The idea of going far away began as a joke, something neighbors teased him about. "One day, you'll sing on TV," they said, laughing. Juan laughed too, but the thought rooted itself deep inside him. When he saw videos of singers on talent shows, his chest tightened. The stages were bright, the crowds endless. He imagined himself there, small and scared, but singing anyway. Then, impossibly, the chance came. Paperwork, long lines, borrowed money, and prayers whispered late into the night. Saying goodbye to Manila felt like tearing a page from his life. His mother held him tightly, pressing a small cross into his palm. "Wherever you go," she said, "remember who you are." The journey was overwhelming. Airports larger than anything he'd known, announcements in languages that rushed past him, the constant feeling of being somewhere he didn't quite belong. He clutched his guitar like an anchor. On the plane, he sang quietly to himself, steadying his nerves as clouds rolled by like soft mountains. Backstage at the audition, time moved strangely. The room buzzed with voices and laughter and fear. People stretched, prayed, rehearsed. Juan sat on the floor, knees pulled to his chest, eyes closed. He thought of Manila, the smell of rice, the warmth of neighbors, the sound of his father's voice. He thought of why he sang. When his name was called, his heart thundered so loudly he was sure everyone could hear it. He walked toward the stage, lights blazing, the audience a blur. The judges sat like silhouettes against brightness. Juan swallowed, gripping his guitar. This was not just a performance. This was every morning, every night, every song sung to survive. He took a breath and began. The last note left Juan's lips and seemed to hover in the air, trembling, unwilling to fall. His fingers rested lightly on the guitar strings, as if even touching them might break the fragile silence that followed. For a heartbeat, then another, the theater did not breathe. Juan's chest rose and fell too fast, his eyes fixed somewhere beyond the judges, beyond the lights, as though he were still standing on the narrow street back home, singing to the night. He lowered his head slightly, waiting for the world to speak back to him. The silence pressed against his ears until he wondered if he had failed, if the song had been too quiet, too honest, too small for a room this big. His hands began to shake. He tightened his grip on the guitar strap, grounding himself in the familiar weight. Then he heard it, the sound of one person clapping. Slow at first, deliberate. Another joined, then another, until the applause swelled like a rising tide. Juan looked up, startled, his eyes wide as he took in the sight of people standing, cheering, some wiping tears from their faces. The noise rushed toward him, warm and overwhelming, and for a moment he felt dizzy, like the ground had shifted under his feet. The judges leaned forward, their expressions unreadable and intense. Juan forced himself to smile, a shy, uncertain curve of his lips, and nodded slightly, as if thanking them simply for listening. He had sung his truth. Whatever came next was out of his hands. One judge spoke first, voice gentle, words careful. She talked about the purity in his voice, about how the song felt like a confession whispered in the dark. Another judge followed, praising his courage, his control, the way he had turned pain into something beautiful. Juan listened, but their words washed over him like waves he couldn't quite catch. His heart was still racing, his mind still replaying the last note, wondering if his father would have liked it. Then Simon leaned forward. The room seemed to shrink around that small movement. Juan felt his stomach twist as he met Simon's gaze. He had seen that face on screens back home, had imagined this moment 100 different ways. None of those imagined versions felt as heavy as the real thing. Simon didn't speak right away. He studied Juan, eyes sharp but not unkind, as if trying to see past the boy on stage and into the life that had shaped him. Juan swallowed and waited, every muscle tense. "You know," Simon began, his voice calm, measured, "I've heard thousands of singers stand on this stage." He paused, letting the weight of the words settle. Juan's grip tightened again. "And most of them come out here trying to impress us. Trying to be perfect." Simon tilted his head slightly. "You didn't do that." Juan blinked, unsure if this was good or bad. "You came out here and you told a story," Simon continued. "Not with tricks, not with volume, but with honesty. And that's rare." He leaned back, eyes still locked on Juan. "Where you come from, what you've been through, it's in your voice. And that's something no one can teach." Juan felt heat rise behind his eyes. He pressed his lips together, fighting the sudden sting of tears. He thought of his mother's hands folding banana leaves, of his father's weak smile when Juan sang beside his bed. He hadn't meant to bring all of that here, but it had come anyway. Simon glanced toward the audience, then back at Juan. "I think people at home need to hear this. I think they need to hear you." For a split second, nothing happened. Juan barely had time to register the shift in Simon's posture, the movement of his hand, before the sound exploded through the theater. The golden buzzer rang out, loud and undeniable, cutting through the air like lightning. Juan froze. Above him, the ceiling seemed to burst open as gold confetti rained down, swirling in the lights like a storm of sunlight. The audience erupted, screaming, cheering, clapping so hard the sound vibrated through his bones. The judges jumped to their feet. The moment was too big, too bright, too sudden. Juan's guitar slipped slightly as his knees gave way. He dropped to the stage floor, one hand braced against the ground, the other covering his mouth. Tears spilled freely now, blurring everything into color and light. He shook his head again and again, as if trying to wake himself from a dream he didn't dare believe. The confetti stuck to his hair, his shoulders, his shirt. He looked down at his hands. These same hands that sold rice cakes, that washed dishes, that strummed an old guitar under flickering streetlights, and laughed through his sobs. The sound surprised him. It sounded lighter than he felt. Someone was speaking to him, asking how he felt, but the words barely reached him. All he could think was, "This is real. This is happening. He looked up toward the judges, his eyes searching until they found Simon's. Simon nodded once, a small gesture, but it carried a weight that made Juan's chest tighten all over again. Juan stood slowly, unsteady, wiping his face with the back of his hand. He bowed deeply, instinctively, toward the judges, toward the audience, toward everyone who had listened. The crowd responded with another wave of cheers, and he straightened, smiling openly now, his face still wet with tears. In that moment, time stretched. Juan imagined his mother watching somewhere far away, hands clasped, whispering prayers. He imagined his neighbors gathered around a small screen, shouting his name. He imagined telling his father what had happened, replaying the sound of the buzzer until they both laughed. The stage no longer felt frightening. It felt like a doorway. As the applause continued, Juan took a deep breath and placed his hand over his heart. He didn't know what came next, only that something had changed forever. The boy who sang to survive had been heard, and as the gold confetti settled around his feet, Juan understood that this was not the end of his journey, but the beginning of a new song, one the world was finally ready to hear.